Hello, welcome to Scholars Hub at Home. I'm Allison Gampel, Associate Director of Alumni Engagement at York University. Thank you so much for joining us today for CoVideo, Speculations on the Future of Live Performance. This webinar, as you know, is part of our Scholars Hub speaker series and features timely educational lectures by academics and researchers from York. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the land York's campuses are built on. As this event is virtual and we are not all gathered in the same space, I recognize that the following land acknowledgement might not be for the territory that you're currently on. If this is the case, please take the responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory that you are on and the current treaty holders. As a member of the York University community, I recognize that many Indigenous nations have longstanding relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. I am grateful for the opportunity to live and work on Treaty 13 land. Before I introduce our speaker today, I'm also pleased to announce that York University has been recognized for the 9th consecutive year as one of Canada's greenest employers. The university has made great strides in supporting sustainable practices in teaching, research, and partnerships. York is proud of its continued dedication and leadership in the space and will continue to do its part through collaboration, engagement, and innovation, with opportunities to make an impact in our local and global communities. To learn more about York's commitment to sustainability and how you can get involved, please visit yorku.ca/sustainability. Let's get started. We always like to get to know our audience a bit better with a quick poll before we begin. So today's question is, how would you rate your current knowledge on today's topic regarding the topic of, with regards to today's presentation? So choose from the following options. How knowledgeable are you on the topic that we're about to present? Please note that all of your questions and comments are visible to our panelists and staff working behind the scenes. So we ask that you keep your comments relevant and respectful. The poll's already popped up, and thank you all for responding. It's always helpful for us to have an idea about who's here and what knowledge you have about our topic before we begin our event. So many of us are experts already with Zoom, but if you do need any help at all today, please feel free to click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and enter your question. Our team is ready to help you. And that same button can be used to submit questions for our guest speaker and to answer that they will answer during the Q&A period following today's presentation. For those of you watching live on Facebook, please feel free to submit any questions or comment through the comment section for the video, and the team will send them my way. Okay, so today's talk, titled CoVideo, Speculations on the Future of Live Performance, featuring Dr. Sarah Bay-Cheng, the Dean of our School of Arts, Media, Performance, and Design, which is affectionately called our AMPD faculty. So the School of Arts, Media, Performance, and Design is Canada's most comprehensive arts and design school, offering socially engaged young artists, designers, and performers and thinkers an opportunity to connect cultural expression with evolving technologies, building equitable and sustainable futures for themselves and their communities. For more information about the faculty, please visit ampd.yorku.ca. And Dr. Sarah Bay-Cheng is the Dean of this school and is a professor of theater and performance study at York University here in Toronto. Her research focuses on the intersections among theater, performance, and media, including histories of cinema, social media, and digital technologies in performance and culture. Her books include Performance and Media, Taxonomies for a Changing Field, and Mapping Intermediality in Performance, as well as more than 50 articles, essays, and invited lectures. Bay-Cheng has also worked as a director and dramaturge with particular interest in intermedial collaborations and a fondness for puppetry and basketball. Welcome, Dr. Bay-Cheng. I invite you to please turn on your video, and we are absolutely delighted to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Allison, for that great introduction, and hello to everyone who is out there, and thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. It's really a joy to get to talk about these ideas, and amid all of the challenges of the past 14 months and the ongoing pandemic, among other social and cultural challenges that we face. I find that these kinds of talks and even at a distance, these kinds of communities and thinking about the future can be really restorative and even joyful opportunities for us to think about a better tomorrow. So I'm really grateful for your attention and time. And I look forward to the ensuing conversation. I also just want to take a quick moment because this is an event directed at alumni, and I know that not all of you have the privilege of being York alumni, but to our alumni and even beyond, our contributors and supporters, I just want to say on behalf of everyone, the faculty, the students, and the staff of AMPD, thank you for everything that you have done to really help us and sustain us through the past year and more. We would not have made it where we've arrived without you. And you've really kept our student spirits up, as well as provided key resources at really important times for us to continue our work and to keep being able to imagine another future for the future of arts and performance in particular. So thank you again for everything that you do for AMPD and for York University every day. If it's all right with you, I'm going to start by sharing my screen and playing around with some slides here. Okay, so here, I think we're about ready to, oh, yep, there we go. And there I am sitting here. Okay, good. So hopefully everyone can see this. Yeah, I'm just gonna pull up some notes off to the side. So don't mind me if I'm sort of looking a little bit off to the side. So as Allison introduced, yes, so CoVideo, and I think that this is kind of an interesting word that has a lot of different valences to it. One, it is the arts as a move towards video inflected, things like this event, obviously. But there's also a notion of co-creation that I think underlies a lot of this, and the idea that art forms, and particularly performing arts, are really undergoing a profound transformational shift that even after the pandemic, in a kind of post-pandemic world, I think will remain with us in a lot of different and kind of interesting ways. So why do I say this? Well, part of this is based on my own work looking at the past. And so one thing that we might pay attention to is trends in digital performance. And so here's some data from the United States, and particularly the NEA, or the National Endowment for the Arts. And an ongoing, every 10 years or so, there is a survey of public participation in the arts that looks broadly at national engagement. And you'll see that back in 2002, about a little over 22% of the recipients had attended a live theater performance, and we're going to talk about theater alone for a moment, but there are some we'll broaden it to include dance and other kinds of performing arts, and that almost the same number, so 21% of those surveyed had watched at least one recording of a performance. And you might expect that, I mean, this is obviously pre-social media. There's no Facebook Live. There's, limited opportunities for VR, things like this. So you might expect by the time the same survey happened in 2017 that this would have changed significantly. And certainly in the early aughts, people were really worried that digital performance and online and video recordings were going to supplant live performance. And the fact of the matter is that 15 years on from the original survey, this simply was not true. Slightly more of the survey recipients had attended a live performance, but even fewer had seen a recording of theater. However, if you look at the bottom statistic, 78% of those surveyed reported that they had experienced art via electronic media. And so, again, this is only, less than 5 years ago. People were starting to look for art more broadly across the medial spectrum. Now, I have to confess, I'm an American living and working here in Canada, and very grateful to be here, and thank you all for welcoming me. I do also have a history as a very dedicated teacher, and so I try to come back to my roots, which means that now we get to the favorite part of my teaching, which is the pop quiz. So if you could all sort of have this, take this moment to reflect on this quiz. What you'll see in the previous slide, I'm talking about the United States, but here I'd love to know what your thoughts are on Canada, right? So looking at and thinking about, in a Canadian context, is the online watching, for, like significantly different since the pandemic or not? So I'll give it a sort of moment there until our, poll results come in. Okay. Oh, so interesting. Like, oh, so about split. Okay. So let's look at some data specifically in the Canadian context. Okay. So I'll just get out of the way here. Okay, so the Canada Council for the Arts ran a very similar kind of audience survey to the one that we find in the US through the NEA, also in 2002, which was about performing arts attendance, so not just theater. And you'll see that the response was actually quite comparable. A little over 21%, almost 22% had attended a live performance of theater at that time. However, there were no questions, unlike the US survey, about recording or performing arts media. However, the Canadian Association for Performing Arts and a related research association in 2012 reported that at that time, 86%, so this is even more than we saw with the US, of Canadians had accessed some sort of performing arts presentation through electronic media, so television, internet, and other media channels. And yet, of course, within that, respondents still recorded that their preference, right, that they saw greater value in the live performing arts. But what it suggests is that this is not actually new, that people have been watching performance online in Canada and through television and film for quite a while, right? So almost a decade, and by a fairly large percentage, right? So what we're seeing over the past year is not entirely new. But certainly some things have profoundly changed during that time. So if we look now, sort of thinking about the what I'm affectionately calling, well, and we'll put affectionate in quotes there, of the annus coronavirus, right, or the BCV and ACV. What does arts and performing arts attendance look like? Well, over the past year, and as recorded, as you'll see in October of 2020. About 50% of people in that time had watched some sort of cultural programming online. And significantly, a fair number of those had been willing to pay for online entertainment of one kind or another. And that there was most interest, you'll see here, in fully staged performances. So this is watching of live theater or dance or opera performances available online. And certainly what we've seen over the past 14 months is a greater expanse and opportunity and a real, a massive opening of archives that were previously closed, works that had previously been very difficult to see or even to get to, right? So I've been able to see works from all over Europe, China, certainly the UK over the last 14 months that I would never have been able to afford to travel to individually. And so it's opened up, as well as historical travel. So I've seen, the 1957 film of Brecht's Mother Courage at the Berliner Ensemble. I've seen, historical performances from various theaters that have opened their archives. And so it's been a travel across time and space for those of us who study live performance, really quite extraordinary. But we've also seen, in addition to kind of looking at the transformation of live performance brought into online media, we've also seen an expansion of rethinking what online offers in terms of the creation of new works, right? So one of my favorites of this was a show about 45 minutes long that was originally kind of co-created through the social media website TikTok, and really crowdsourced of a massive kind of undertaking of thousands of people contributing material to the development of Ratatouille, the TikTok musical, which became its own kind of sensation when it became adapted. It was secured the rights for a one-time only performance. That performance of the 45-minute musical adaptation of the Disney film received over 200 million views. And on $5 ticket sales raised over $1 million for the Actors Fund in New York. Earlier this year, as part of a New Year's Eve concert, they massive, and they've even become bigger since then, the K-pop band of BTS staged a New Year's Eve concert. And that concert had two distinct performances. It was performed live and simulcast around the world. It received almost 1 billion paid views from 191 regions around the world. So we're starting to see the scale, right? Both the immediacy and the access to existing performance, as well as a transformation of performance across different boundaries and genre. What is this likely to look afterwards? So these are some statistics that have just come in. Capicoa posted these earlier in April. From the Nanos Research Group, and I've put a link at the bottom of the slide that you can go to and read more in depth. And this was polling audiences about what they kind of work they had experienced during the pandemic and what they expected to after. And here's one of the interesting things about this. I mean, you'll see that there's a fairly significant amount of consumption of online free material during the pandemic, and that drops fairly significantly to what people are expecting to engage with post-pandemic. Interestingly, the audience for online paid work declines much less, right? So both declines are there, but there's actually less of a decline from people who are currently engaging with online paid performance versus who anticipate going to that afterwards. And then of course you see the free events that and the in-person paid events in which people anticipate a fairly significant upswing. The most interesting statistics in this slide for me is comparing the average amount of time that people are spending looking at online free performance during the pandemic and what their anticipated engagement with performance is after. And so you'll see that, while we're trapped at home, we're currently in a stay-at-home order here in Toronto, that there's just a huge plethora of online and very limited options. But that we see that actually the engagement with performance, both paid and free, is something that's likely to carry over. And so thinking about what is the mix and the future combination of these, and how can we as audiences, but also as creators, think about what we want to make differently and how we might want to work, and what are the implications for performing arts after the pandemic. And I say post-pandemic with the idea too that the lessons of the pandemic, the experiences of the past year or more, are not simply going to go away, even if the virus were somehow to magically disappear tomorrow, right? There's certain things that we've learned and have explored that are likely to be with us for quite some time. This sentiment was echoed in this quote from the creator of Hamilton, Lin Manuel Miranda. Of course, Hamilton, massive, global musical phenomenon, hugely successful, multiple tours running across North America and really around the world at the time of the pandemic closed live performance venues. That show, of course, premiered on Disney Plus last summer. And received enormous sort of views and suddenly became accessible to people who would never be able to access a ticket in their own town or travel to a major theater center in order to see it in New York or London or Toronto or someplace like that. And so his certain expectation is that these things are going to change, and I'm quite inclined to agree with him. All right, so now we have another quiz coming up, which is to sort of ask what what from your perspective is the most significant digital performance technology of the late 20th century? So just go ahead and pick the one that makes the most sense to you. And then I'll tell you my choice. Okay, it's cell phone, absolutely, right? Very, very, really important technology. VCR, absolutely, precursor of DVDs, right? Which was of course, the precursor, the first iteration of Netflix, which became streaming. For sure, cable television, the idea of, round the clock media entertainment in your home, right? All of this, but I'm a little sad. I won't lie, because in fact, I'll give you my pick, which is might surprise you. In fact, it probably will, because I don't think anyone else picked this, but for me, it is the Jumbotron. So this is the Sony Jumbotron, as it premiered at the 1985 World's Fair. And for sure, all of those other technologies are incredibly important. But let me explain or say a little bit about why I think the Jumbotron is one of the key technologies, if not the most important digital performance technology of the late 20th century leading into the 21st. And for those of you not familiar with the Jumbotron, I just want to sort of give a little bit of a background here. Of course, the Jumbotron, again, introduced in 1985, turned this, right? This is the sort of, conventional scoreboard for sports performance. This is for a basketball game, for those of you who may not be familiar. Turned this into this. And what's significant about this? Well, the thing that's interesting about the Jumbotron is it is a form of digital performance that lives in two spaces at once, right? So it is part of a live performance event, right? So I'm at a basketball game. This is a shot from a Mavericks game, Dallas Mavericks game. I'm at a basketball game. I am part of a live audience crowd. I'm also part of a live event in which I believe very much, as we do in theater, that my physical and often vocal presence matters, that I can have a demonstrable effect on the game that is happening. And this phenomenon is so profound for sports fans that even when we are at home watching a game, we will continue to yell at the screen and at the refs and at our team and at the other team, even though in our conscious rational minds, we know that our screaming at our own home televisions does not actually impact the efforts and the effects of the game. What's interesting about the Jumbotron is it happens as part of a live event, but it is also one that, like the VCR and the cell phone, gives us the opportunity to see ourselves as participants in the event, right? And so the Jumbotron not only shows us key moments of the event as part of the live experience, it also gives us an opportunity to see ourselves watching. And this is in fact one of the key moments. And the Jumbotron has gone through a number of evolutions. One of the most significant was part of the Beyonce Formation tour on a massive LED rotating screen. So this is actually a huge box designed by the British stage designer, Es Devlin. And it rotates and it turns around, but it also brings a kind of massive scale televisual experience of the concert to the live performer. And if you sort of look over my shoulder here, right? So this is sort of just over my virtual shoulder. You will see that someone this is in Wembley Stadium in London. You will see that someone has very good tickets to this, right? Is relatively close to the stage. And yet has their cell phone, as you'll sort of see if you sort of look in the screen of the cell phone just off next to me here, you'll see that they are taking a picture of a large digital image projected on a large scale environment, right? So this is again. So now we are the Jumbotron has now combined with the mobile phone to kind of create a feedback loop of documentation and presence. And for me, this is the most important part of the future of live performance. And it's one that when the NBA was forced to move into the so-called bubble last season, and has continued to kind of negotiate the safety and ways around COVID, introduced this concept of the whole new game, and particularly the virtual fans. And this again is simply an evolution of the Jumbotron, both showing us, right, ourselves to ourselves. And you'll see that that sports becomes really significant here in creating a kind of digital physical hybrid of the live event in which you are present and virtual and provide many domains or many opportunities for simultaneous viewing. Last year, in response to having gone to a Toronto Raptors game at a drive-in theater, I had occasion to write some of these ideas down, and I'll give you some. We're running short of time, so I'm going to give you some of these highlights and then open it up for conversation, because I'm curious to hear your thoughts, critiques, and ideas. And this really, it focused on 4 key ideas, and this is what I really do believe the future of post-pandemic performance is likely to be. One is that it will be hybrid. That drawing on the technologies of the Jumbotron and mobile technologies and virtual and augmented reality technologies, we are likely to see performance that continues to cross over these domains. That is always a combination of physical presence, of engaged physical community, social community, but that has extensions and collaborations and even interjections of the digital within those spaces. The second is that the emotional investment, like in a sports game or in other kinds of social investments, that the degree of emotional and social commitment among the audience matters a great deal. The third is this notion that all of these technologies are likely to continue, but they are increasingly going to be activated through mobile technologies, and are going to both work in physical spaces like the arena, like the theater, as well as becoming much more nimble and expressing outside of it. And this has tremendous implications for everything from theaters to museums to concert venues, and how we negotiate these boundaries is going to be really critical. But the last is that at the end of the day, it is the social component that is in some ways the most compelling, and also we've seen in the denial of it some of the most valuable and really most precious. And so as we look to recreate these experiences safely after in the wake of the pandemic and with the vaccine rollout, that will also become a really key component of how we imagine this together. I have a few more slides sort of focused on VR and AR technologies, but I think in the interest of time, I might simply leave it there. So you can certainly answer the poll, but I'll give it away a little bit. In 2020, the Oculus sold a little over 160,000 units. So excellent guess, everyone who answered that. But the real question is, how many pre-orders were there for the Oculus Quest 2 by December 2020? And according to at least some calculations by related companies who produce games, they think that they estimated the pre-orders for that to be in the realm of 2 to 3 million. And that's just in the fourth quarter of 2020 and in the early days of so this is an exponential transformation that, again, I think is likely to radically reshape how we think about live performance and where performance of all kinds happens. And I should be clear that I'm not just talking about dance and theater and opera. I'm also thinking about presentations. I'm thinking about corporate presentations. I mean, there's lots of different kinds of performance that happen in different spaces, and all of this is going to be really upended and shaken by how we are experiencing this. And I'll just conclude with going back to K-pop band BTS, and this is an image from their map of the Seoul 1 New Year's Eve concert, and you'll see that they performed this in a more or less empty stadium in Seoul. But they were surrounded by virtual fans. They were also surrounded by these bits of technologies that fans could that sort of would represent the fans. So those little purple dots are so-called army bombs that are there to sort of stand in for fans and were manipulated. As part of this package, you could as part of your viewing package, and again, almost 1 billion people worldwide tuned in to see these concerts. You had AR opportunities. You could look at XR or mixed reality interactions. There were up to 6 camera packages that you could purchase and switch and toggle between them so that you could create your own viewing experience. And one of the most significant things, and I'll sort of end it here, and thanks for your indulgence and time, is that the production company behind BTS, a group known as Big Hit, at the end of 2020 or in the early months of 2021, announced that they had purchased an artificial intelligence company. And so they are rapidly moving into a complete saturation of integration of live and technological creation. And I think this is where this is one of the trends that we need to be very attentive to in terms of what our live performance environments are likely to look like in the years to come after the pandemic. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to your questions and attention, and thanks again for having me, Allison, and everybody at Alumni Engagement at York.
Thank you very much for being with us. We really appreciate you being here and sharing this amazing insight. Okay, perfect. I was going to tell you could stop sharing your screen, and you've done it already. You read my mind. Yeah, that was certainly very interesting and very informative, and gave me more meaning and purpose to, when I first, downloaded Hamilton, and when I paid the $5 to watch Ratatouille with my kids, and wondered, like, what is all this? Now I sort of have a deeper understanding of what this was all, like where it was coming from and how it was working together. So thank you for that. I want to start with the first question, which is, when we're watching online performances, are we watching them in a different way than we do when we watch live?
So, I think it depends on who is the we in that sentence. I'm 47. I grew up watching television, but in an era of broadcast TV. I still remember when UHF was new. I remember when cable got introduced, and I was a teenager when MTV was first hitting the airwaves. So the way I watch online and digital performance is very different the way my children, for example, who are 19 and 20, so they're not really children, but the way my sons watch online. They grew up in an era of digital media, of social media. They watch and follow and participate in Instagram and other social media platforms in a very different way that I do. I remember when VR was brand new, and vaguely nausea inducing. But just in the last year, I've seen some incredible events, including art exhibits and curatorial exhibits that we've been able to stage, through our Department of Visual Art and Art History, for example, in VR, into great effect. So, I think every audience, and there are lots of, I always caution my theater students against ever talking about the audience, right? Because an audience is a bunch of individuals who come with their own histories and their own expectations. And we can certainly talk about, demographics and access in lots of different ways. But I think every era, every historical moment is shaped both by the technologies that have come before and the ones that they're encountering in the immediate present. And what I would suggest is that the technologies and the video and the images that we are consuming in the context of the pandemic are likely to shape how we understand performance going forward. And again, I see a really strong corollary between live artistic and aesthetic performance, so thinking about theater, dance, music, et cetera, and sports, in terms of, sports has a longer history of a combined televisual and live performance ecosystem, right? It had both of those for a long, long time. And the way that I watch a live sporting event is sometimes very much shaped by the way I watch the recorded or the televised sporting event, and vice versa, right? So, that effect I talked about earlier. And I think we're likely to see something similar happening in that our expectations and our audience's expectations. But we shouldn't just treat this as passive. It's also something that we can, as artists, actively shape and start to really think about how to meet our audiences where they are, and then think about where we want them to go and what we want them to experience and what we want them to understand. And I would say that some of the moments of theater that have been most profound for me, some of which have been probably cost millions of dollars to create and have huge amounts of technology, and some have had no technology at all other than the human presence and the human voice, and human proximity. And so I think it's understanding that spectrum and working across it consciously in terms of what is it that we're saying and what is it that a particular piece is trying to do.
Thank you for that. I think that really leads nicely to a question that came in from Stefan. And the question is, in the context of hybrid and redefined notion of liveness, how do we train performers and actors to be aware? And how do we redefine the role of a director in a hybrid environment?
So I love this question. It's one that my colleagues in theater at York are absolutely grappling with and thinking really seriously about right now, which is, what does this training look like? Increasingly what we're seeing is that some of the kind of core fundamentals of theater, physical presence, vocal modulation, awareness of context, how to, the so-called how to read the room, responding to interactions. I see that there's one of the questions that came up and raises this question of liveness is one that has significance even in a digital environment. And certainly, we're in a quote unquote live event right now. I'm reading, Allison's facial responses and affect as cues to how to adapt and how to respond to. And it's muted, right? It's definitely more limited than if we were sitting in an open, forum physically together. But I'm also aware that I'm talking to people who, are not in Toronto or not in Canada. And that offers a whole different kind of context and responsiveness. And so again, it's thinking about these things in combination and in relation to each other. So I would say fundamentally, I think every actor needs to have an understanding of the different kinds of technologies and the different kind of platforms and opportunities that are available to them, so that everyone can sort of pick and choose consciously where they want and what kind of project needs to live in what kind of space. And that's conscious and deliberate, as opposed to, well, I don't really know how to do screen work, or I don't really understand computers and video games, right? So I think we just need a much more expansive notion of this. And in terms of directing, this is a word that moves across different media. And I think increasingly what we're trying to do in AMPD is to recognize that there are specializations and expertise and histories and skills in lots of different places of the faculty that can really inform and enhance one another. And so the way I usually talk about this is we're moving from a model of education that looks like a conveyor belt, right? Where you kind of get in at one end and you follow a path, and along the way you kind of get stamped, and then you pop out a fully formed, AMPD widget at the end and do one thing. We're very much moving away from that model, in which we're thinking about art design, and of course media performance and music education as much more interconnected, as fundamentally dynamic, and as inherently collaborative and multidisciplinary. And so it's really about thinking about it less as a conveyor belt and more as a subway system, in which everybody gets on at a different spot. They take different trajectories and pathways through that system, but the system is integrated and connected, and that all the different pathways touch one another at kind of key nodes. And it's thinking about how those experiences and what students can make of their own combinations to really enhance whatever their particular passions or interests are, as well as understanding what are the opportunities. And we think that this is really important because it's about how to navigate not just the profession today or the profession tomorrow, but also about how to really drive the next innovations in the next era, and really provide the success that we know that our students have traditionally and historically experienced after their education at York, and we want to continue that for the next generation of AMPD and York University graduates.
Thank you. So speaking of the future, a question that came in from Jane that I'd like to ask is, what might travel reluctance or restrictions mean for live attendance when we're able to go back?
So I'm like many of you, I have my fantasy travel list, and that on many days, like I kind of review like, well, this is where I will go next, and then I will travel here. I think, I'm not a public health expert, and I'm certainly not a transportation expert. It is, from everything I've read, it's likely that travel will continue to be more muted, and perhaps more, less. I think there may be less of it, regardless of the pandemic or travel restrictions. I think, one of the other major impacts on travel and how we think about it affecting performance is, of course, sustainability, and accessibility, right? So thinking about, is it really, necessary to, and should we be encouraging people to travel extensively, across the planet to see performances? And recognizing that, I've been really unbelievably privileged in that, because of my area of study, I've often been able to receive research funding and grant funding that has enabled me to travel to places that I would never have been able to travel to on my own. And it's facilitated collaborations with people that I would not be able to do that had I not been, a theater professor, quite frankly. And I think the question also is, do we want that kind of access and conceptual artistic travel to be only the domain and only accessible by a small number of people? Or is there value in trying to find ways to make that more accessible? And this, again, I think speaks to the hybrid to that Lin Manuel Miranda quote, which is that, absolutely seeing Hamilton live is a great experience. But is that the only way to see Hamilton? No. And are there things that happen and that you see in the record? So I've seen it both ways. I've seen it in the theater, and I've seen it on the Disney Plus recording. And there are different things that happen in both of those shows. And I can point to any one of a number of other live performances that I've seen, both in a live version and in a recorded version, that really enhance each other. And so I think thinking about certainly travel restrictions are going to shape it. I think we need to think very carefully about what kind of work we're producing and for whom. I certainly am looking forward to travel. I hope other people travel. I really believe in the value of intercultural experience, and transnational, theater going. But I also think we can be mindful and really supplement that and pay some real close attention to what are the larger, planetary and environmental impacts, and be very selective in how we do that, and also opening up and broadening access beyond simply live performance and live attendance.
Do you think, to add to that, do you think that there will be ways that the different parts of the world can learn from one another? So I understand from one of our participants here that the UK is planning to open up live performance with certain restrictions. What can Broadway and Toronto learn in order to do the same when the time is right?
So, so I have one of my very good friends is a researcher in London, Jen Parker Starbuck, who I've written with and collaborated with and still talk to almost weekly. And there was a moment, I believe it was like last summer, maybe early fall, where London really opened up and people were going to theater again, and she had gone to see a show called Blindness, which is a sort of socially and intentionally physically distanced, audio presence. And I remember she was telling us about this, and I was looking at pictures and I was so jealous I was just like unbelievably jealous that she like got to go to a theater. I think those kinds of international collaborations and connections are really important. And I think the more that we can do to facilitate different kinds of cultural partnerships and collaborations among, researchers and universities, professional venues, community centers and community-based venues, in terms of thinking about, what's working, what are the opportunities. One of the things that we're doing in again, AMPD at York is we're retrofitting our live performance spaces. So our concert hall, our theaters, with enhanced live streaming and hybrid production capacity. And we're doing that for a couple of reasons. One, because we want to give our students a state-of-the-art training opportunity so that they can begin experimenting and learning how to create multi-dimensional live events for themselves and to prepare them to really, work in the industry after graduation. We're also doing it as a kind of research and development tool, like something that we can experiment with and give some of our partners, live performance venues, for example, especially those who have been really profoundly affected by the shutdowns and by COVID, and aren't in a position to be making these kinds of investments in their own performance spaces, a place to kind of test it out and see what works and see what they like and try to do this. And of course, we will be, sharing the effects of these experiments and collaborations with others. I imagine that we will have people who will publish about them as well. We'd love to, when time and public health guidelines permit, invite people to come and do various projects in those spaces. And to really learn from one another. And we, of course, will continue to reach out to our collaborators. I mean, I think it's why, international collaborations and partnerships are so critical, not just in my faculty, but across York University, because it's a way of sharing information and knowledge and helping each other try to figure out what is the best solution? How do we move forward? And also looking at what are opportunities to develop, international standards. So one other area that I'm involved with right now is a group called the Performing Arts Information Representation. And this is a World Wide Web, so a W3 consortium working group, which is about developing digital standards for how we understand performing arts online. And that this is being driven predominantly by artists, so that the language and representation and framework for documenting and sharing and commenting on performance online is driven by the people who are closest to it and invested in it. But it's also a profoundly international and intercultural one. So paying attention. I just said language, right? It should be really languages. And not just, Anglophone, Francophone here in Canada, but also looking at Indigenous language representation and how that gets embedded and is integral to the project from the beginning. We're in collaboration with a group in the EU. We're in collaboration with folks in Australia and in the UK, and looking to widen this as well, so that it's really a kind of global framework to help us, articulate what we're doing, but also in the context of online. And I mentioned AI earlier. It's also about search and searchability and accessibility. How do we find what we're looking for? How do we make use of the data that's available? And how do artists take control of their own data to use it to the ends that they're pursuing? So I could go on. I won't today, but there's a lot of different dimensions to this and opportunities for collaboration and sharing that I'm really excited by, and to some extent has been one of the silver linings from this very difficult time in terms of facilitating truly global partnerships and collaborations.
Absolutely, there are opportunities and that have come out of this. In the interest of time, we have so many wonderful pieces of feedback and people that are really, really appreciative of you sharing all of this insight with us. But we will have to wrap it up after this final question. So I'm going to ask the final question that's coming from John, and I'll read it to you, Sarah. It says, I like your analogy between the performing arts and sports, but one roadblock is that musicians and performing artists are being asked to perform together, but remotely and detached. Is it impossible for a basketball team to all play together from home via Zoom? Why is it that the arts are being pushed towards that format when the concept of performing as an ensemble is identical to players having to perform as a team?
I could not agree more. I think, you know, there have, and in terms of musicians especially, I mean, this has really been an extraordinary challenge for music. And this is an area that was already being, you know, seriously challenged in the shift from, you know, in the way that record production, for example, happened to streaming. I mean, it used to be, and I'm not going to tell any musician out there something they don't already know, right? It used to be that, you know, you made money from recordings of your music, and you went on tour to promote and drive those sales. With streaming, with the digitization of music, with the moving from single units, you know, the movement from like a recorded album as a full, you know, a kind of integrated purchase and a kind of carefully crafted you know, audio experience to, you know, the kind of being able to purchase one-off singles and the significant decreased value of what each one of those singles is worth. The entire funding model for music, the music industry flipped. Right now, you know, and this again is prior to the pandemic, you made recordings and you circulated those at close to free in many instances, if not actually free. And then you used those recordings to drive tour and live performance, which is where, you know, where most of the sustainable revenue came from. And of course, this has been devastating. And, you know, Canadian Live Music Association has been talking about this for the better part of a year. And I'm really grateful to Aaron Benjamin and everybody who's been advocating so energetically on behalf of live musicians in Canada and around the world. It's been really, really difficult. You know, what's interesting and where I would say the major distinction with sports is John's absolutely right. The need is no different at all. The difference is that there was already an ecosystem and the ability and frankly the capital to very quickly create the kind of bubble conditions that allowed players to play simultaneously. And frankly, also the prioritization. You know, we've seen, you know, some industries with capital and priority be able to make the kind of shifts that they've wanted to make and be able to transition and to do that. We've seen other industries, you know, particularly live performing arts, you know, really struggle. You know, you know, here in Toronto, there's a kind of, you know, strange duality in which, you know, film and media production has continued, and the investments that people have made and the way that that's been able to continue safely and, you know, has been really quite extraordinary. But we haven't necessarily treated our live theater venues, for example, the same. And so it's thinking about, you know, how do we negotiate that? And there again, I think there's really an important lesson to be learned by the power of collaboration and how we can learn from and connect different industries. And, you know, obviously there are huge kind of policy guidelines and rules, and, you know, the spheres of this are really quite separate. But I think that as we think towards the future, both in terms of advocacy for policies that are going to support artists, training for emerging and reskilling and retooling artists, thinking about the future of these industries, the more we can really draw the connections and the collaborations together, I think really that is the future of live performance events, whether it's on stage, on basketball courts, you know, or on screens.
Thank you so much. So on that note, we do have to wrap up. So on behalf of all of us, we want to really thank you for spending this time with us, for sharing your work, and for being that leader in our faculty of Arts, Media, Performance, and Design, and continuing to find sort of innovative ways of doing things even amidst difficult times. So thanks for being here, and we wish you all the best.
My pleasure. And you know, I'm a very Googleable human being. And so I know I can see the Q&A out of the corner of my eye, and I regret that we don't have more time to sort of answer everyone. But please, you know, anyone, feel free to reach out anytime. I'm always happy to have these conversations, and also, you know, hear your experiences and ideas as we really try to move the school forward into this, you know, crazy new future we're encountering.
Wonderful. Thanks, Dean Bay-Cheng, for being with us.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
Okay, great. Okay, so you can turn your video off if you're ready. And for our audience, before we say goodbye, we'd like to thank you for being here with us today. We have one last poll question for you, and so it's about to pop up on your screen. The question is, how would you rate your knowledge of the topic today, of today's presentation, now that you've actually listened and been a part of this insightful discussion? So take a moment to give us your answers and let us know if this has increased your learning. I know it certainly has for me. In terms of what's coming up next, we have many great lectures in store for you this spring, so please be sure to check out our website for details. We have a special edition of Scholars Hub at Home on a special day and time coming up on World Bee Day, Thursday, May 20th at noon. Join us for Biodiversity, A Tale of Four Bees, where the executive research team from the Center for Bee Ecology, Evolution, and Conservation on World Bee Day discusses the most important pollinators on the planet. For more information on Scholars Hub at Home series, as well as all of our other virtual events, please feel free to visit our website, yorku.ca/alumni and friends. This talk was recorded, and so if you'd like to revisit any of the insight or share it, please feel free to do so. It'll be posted shortly on the York Alumni channel on YouTube. And we welcome you to amplify the insight that you're learning. So we thank you again for being here. Be well, be safe, and see you later.